The connections between the history of slavery and capitalism are vast, and historians are really only beginning to realize the significance and extent of those connections. And in this vastness, it's very easy to get lost, but we might think especially about two elements of these connections. The first element is the Atlantic slave trade. And the second element is the plantation system. And together, these are at the root of capitalism as a global system. So the Atlantic slave trade is responsible for the systematic relocation and dispossession of 12.5 million people or more. And capitalism helps us explain how that relocation occurs and why, essentially. And relocation is really connected to the emergence of the plantation system in the Americas. So there's a demand for labor to produce sugar, to produce tobacco, to produce cotton. And who is going to perform that labor ultimately is determined by slavery. So in that vastness of the plantation system and the slave trade, there are all sorts of new economic formations that support the slave trade. One is the origins of the joint stock company, and another is insurance and the insurance industry. So insurance underwrites the Atlantic slave trade. When voyages are financed, the financiers and merchants of those voyages take out insurance on enslaved people's lives. So enslaved people become a commodity that's securitized, essentially, and that investors are concerned with, in a certain sense. Concerned with to the extent that there's an investment of capital in it. And the really violent and horrific consequences of this can be seen in the history of the Zong, which is a slave ship that is financed by British merchants in 1781. In 1781, aboard the Zong, there are over 400 people enslaved, and there's an outbreak of sickness aboard the ship. And the captain of the ship recognizes that should enslaved people land in the Americas with sickness, essentially their value will be decreased. And so in response to this, the captain of the ship believes that they'll be able to collect insurance upon enslaved people if they're thrown overboard. So over 130 people are thrown overboard on the Zong so that insurance money can be collected. And I think here we see the real violence of the connection between capitalism and slavery.